Yeah, and obviously, the more freedom we have to decide the directions we want to take in life. It's not just like trans people are like the big spotlight culturally right now because, politically sensational and what have you, wave of the future, blah blah. But I think that outside explicitly like being a different gender than the one you were assigned at birth, a ton of people just kind of wake up at some point in their life and realize they are a person they never wanted to be, that there were
Mhm.
archetypes they adopted because they felt they had no other choice, and they just kept rolling with it because the more you go in that direction, the more the people around you expect that of you, which makes it harder to pull out of that. And it's almost like a stereotype, right, of people in like their 40s or 50s rediscovering themselves and having a total fucking personality shift. Sometimes people make fun of that, but in many cases, I think that's because they have a secure career and now they actually can be themselves. And it's kind of sad they had to wait that long. There's always going to be some process of ongoing self-discovery, but a lot of that is, business guys realizing that being the business guy isn't all there is to life, or housekeeping women realizing they wanted to do more with their life than raising children, or, crap like that. And vice versa sometimes. Sometimes people do the reverse. People realize, oh my God, I wanted kids, is the less external pressure people face, I think, the happier they'll be on average with the choices they make.
Yeah, I think that's true. I will say, I think it's probably much rarer for someone to like get older, get into their 50s and be like, oh, damn, I'm so disappointed that I spent my whole life building like this family and these like strong friendships. And I wish that I had just like done the hustle culture and like
That that's pretty
become a
fucking
business
true.
person.
Yeah. No, oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I'm not a big fan of traditional like nuclear family archetypes, but the concept of family or, close bonds in general, yeah. We
Mhm.
deprioritize those a ton socially. And women tend to get the blunt end of that as well, right? Because if you're a guy, you can work 8 hours a day and then come home to a family and be a socially normalized family guy kind of dude. But women aren't really afforded that same option. They're expected to be the ones taking care of the kids. Women get judged if they're working. People will be like, "Don't you have a 2-year-old?" And the mom will be like, "Yeah, well, she's being taken care of by some help." And it can get a bit unfair wraparound sometimes. I'm a fan of those big polycule family arrangements that we used to have.
Interesting. Can I ask why you're not a fan of the nuclear family?
Um, I think it contributes to atomization. It's a pretty new social
Okay,
phenomenon.
interesting.
Because in plenty of other societies, like people tend to live with their grandchildren or grandparents, like it'll be a multi-generational household. There are downsides to that, right? Like I don't know if I'd want to live with my grandparents, but there are elements of it that are preferable. And right now it just seems like people are really lonely. Like the family unit is really really self-contained right now, in especially in like affluent communities, right? So at least this is what I've noticed from being about the place. Like black people and white people tend to both pursue nuclear families broadly, but if you go to like poor black areas, the neighbors all know each other because poverty sort of necessitates a degree of mutual communication, whether that be watching out for like concerns neighborhood wise, or like, hey, take care of my kid, or hey, can I borrow this, whatever. Whereas like if you go into the suburbs, which are more multiracial now than they used to be, but there's definitely still an element of white coding, nobody knows their fucking neighbors in the suburbs. Maybe like one over, and it's because they mow their lawn when you mow their lawn. But there's people like nobody walks around. It's you're pretty left aside, and I feel like the nuclear family encourages that.
I mean, I guess I would say that I disagree in quite a lot of ways, but and you talk about like the nuclear family contributing to atomization. I would say that it's the opposite, where the degradation of the nuclear family, the encouragement of people to engage in like short term relationships, casual relationships, leads to this feeling of like loneliness and the inability for people to like put down roots and start building community. You bring up like a good point, which is that suburbs tend to be like pretty bad for encouraging like community building or neighborhood building. But I think that's like a little bit different of a question of like whether or not the family unit itself is beneficial. So I think you can have, nuclear family units that within them, there's a lot of community building, there's a lot of like strong partnerships. Um, And then also nuclear families that are interacting with other nuclear families. I'm not necessarily like opposed to like bigger family structures where like you're inviting grandparents in or cousins into the same household. I think that's like legitimate. But I would say that like the nuclear family and the willingness to build family relationships, start families, which is something that we see like precipitously on the decline, you know, not only in America, but in, you know, countries across the world, is something that I think is contributing to this problem of loneliness. And it'd be an improvement if people were more focused on building those family relationships than they are currently.
I guess the issue is that like the areas of the world that have the most committed nuclear families are also the ones that seem to demonstrate the highest degrees of unhappiness, right? When you talk about like level of community involvement, like the suburbs are the worst. And then you have higher levels in poorer areas, not necessarily happiness, but like feeling involved with your community. There can be other negative externalities with regards to happiness because they're, you know, fucking poor, right? I mean, there could be other things affecting that, but they tend to be more community inclined. And then if you go to countries like Brazil, where many people are much poorer and they live in these, you know, these like ramshackle tenements that stretch out across the hills, where oftentimes like you have your family, but you have like your neighborhood family too. Like there's multiple overlapping levels of direct community engagement. You have people who have a much greater degree of community involvement. Again, that's not to say there can't be negative. I mean, I tend to associate this with poverty, but I feel like wealth in this case tends to insulate people from others. Many people's dream is to be like away from others, and they don't realize what that does to them. I think it was there was some Greek philosopher who set about trying to discover the science of happiness, or I guess the nature of happiness, not really the science. Who found that, and this is a highly unscientific discovery, but he found that living in a large house, chat is, it's not Socrates, chat. Do you know only one Greek philosopher? Jesus. That living in a large house with a collection of your friends and just like chilling, Epicurus, thank you, is like the best way of living your life in terms of direct happiness. Like they can be family, you can be fucking them, you can be not fucking them, you know, you can be wealthy, you can be poor, but being around friends is what matters most. And it seems like the pursuit of the nuclear family in the modern era has been kind of to the detriment of community. I don't think it's a juxtaposition between nuclear family and a bunch of shiftless, like, you know, fuck buddies, and then you like have cats when you're 45 or whatever. I feel like the community bond should be emphasized, and the idea of walling yourself off with your married partner should be the thing that we're sort of pushing back against. If you live in a multi-generational household, after all, it's not a nuclear family. Or if you live in like a larger space with multiple other couples, that's also not a nuclear family. And I think those are nice arrangements. I think they tend to make people pretty happy. That's how humans lived back in tribal societies back in the day, right? I mean, whether or not we had marriage back then, you know, people would just fuck whoever, and then the kids would come out, and they would just be sort of raised by the village. I also think two parents is just not enough to raise kids, especially in the modern economy. It doesn't seem like enough, you know. Kids should be able to interact with, you know, few people like in the day to day, not just, you know, you have like the mom and the dad comes home from work and he passes out. You know, it's a variable thing. A lot of this is just us projecting things that we like, but there is some research on different types of family structures next to levels of community integration.